Without objection. And finally, there is a set of minutes for a special meeting held on June 29th. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? Do you have any changes?
No.
Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Okay. Without objection. Under item number 3, first selectmen updates. For those in attendance who perhaps are not regular followers of the Board of Selectmen, under the town charter, there is a requirement that this board meet on a monthly basis and that the first selectman update the other members of the board on matters that come before the office. So this is in keeping with our regular agenda, but for those who are here for the first time, I wanted to give you a context to the remarks that I'm going to just share. So we're looking at things that occurred since our last meeting, some of the more notable. We did receive earlier this week another contribution from the Friends of the Nathaniel Witherell. We received a check in the amount of $1 million. This is part of a very significant gift that was presented in support of Project Renew. I believe we are now close to $9 million that has been raised by the Friends to support Project Renew, and the town is very grateful for the support, truly capping a public-private partnership that has stood the test of time. On the 14th, on a more festive note, we held the annual Bastille Day ceremonies. It was a wonderful opportunity for citizens of Greenwich who are of French ancestry to celebrate this independence, and a ceremony was held out on the front steps of Town Hall with the flag raising. The same day, although I did not attend due to other commitments, the GEMS, Greenwich Emergency Medical, had their annual board meeting. And on Wednesday evening in this room, Eversource Energy held the second public information meeting, for which I believe we all attended for a period of time. This presentation was to demonstrate the various phases of the proposed substation project that is now before the Connecticut Siting Council. The meeting was designed to show interested citizens the various phases of construction and how they would go about undertaking the project. Earlier that day, I had the opportunity to go with several town department heads out into the field and look at some of the proposed routes that the transmission line can take coming out of the Coscob substation. There are clearly varying degrees in which they can follow, either using open trench or horizontal directional drilling. We've had the benefit of our wetlands director, public works director, tree warden, parks director, all in giving advice and counsel. I will say that I think Eversource has at least been amenable to our comments that we would like them to avoid certain areas. What is pending now is a public hearing here in the town of Greenwich by the Connecticut Siting Council. I believe we received communication yesterday as to a potential venue, Mike, do you recall?
September 1st, is that?
Tentatively, it's in early September, and I believe they were looking at the Cole Auditorium at Greenwich Library.
I believe it's booked, yeah, it's booked.
So you'll hear more about that, but what I would like to leave you with is that that is the most important meeting for people who have issues with this project, because that is the adjudicating body who will make the determination, and that's where you want to contribute your comments and concerns and suggestions. At a meeting with the staff here at Town Hall, we invited the chairman of the BET to attend. The purpose of his attendance was to review the town's encumbrance policy. This is the policy that stipulates how long departments can hold capital funds without a contract. So his point in coming to the meeting was to advise departments as they're looking at the 16-17 budgets that do not ask for capital dollars unless you're able to expend them within the period of time in which they're allotted. Now, The counterpoint to that, of course, is that there's a considerable amount of approvals that go into capital projects, both local land use as well as some state regulatory. But everyone was appreciative of the guidance, and we reviewed an appropriation statement dated July 13th that looked at how much been in the general fund. And I think of this. So just to give you the context, this is looking at all outstanding. So there's approximately $43 million that is available, meaning it hasn't been expended or encumbered. And again, the point being, as we look at all these various outstanding items, we have to be considerate of the fact that as we look at requesting next year, whether they can expend the monies in a fashion in accordance with the charter. We also had a regular updates on the Human Resource Information System. There's been full reconciliation to the general ledger as of the end of the fiscal year. That had been one of the major challenges. We also had an update from Melissa Jones, our senior management analyst, about our 311. We are actually doing a soft launch of this public stuff as the application within the Parks Department. And then finally, part of the Community First program that looks at customer service training and process improvements. We've changed the calendar year to be fiscal for the departments to establish their resolutions, their New Year's resolutions that you're going to do certain things, and to emphasize that those integrate into your departmental operational plans as well as the departmental manager's individual goals and objectives for their performance. We had a meeting with the First Selectmen's Economic Advisory Committee. We welcomed a couple of new volunteer members to that. We looked at several topics, one being the impacts of the Connecticut state budget on the town. We looked at ways to make Greenwich more attractive to business. We looked and discussed about appealing to millennials, entertainment venues and events. We also gave a little consideration to the subject of making Greenwich greener via state-of-the-art energy and ecological solutions. A lot of good ideas come out of this. It has no policy-making authority. Rather, it's more just a think tank and an advocacy group to help me and the other folks in the town address issues and concerns. The Chamber showed their annual survey of business attitudes. They shared that, as well as we talked a little bit about inviting a representative from Deloitte, who had put out a white paper on the aspects of the Connecticut state budget and what it means for businesses. And we're talking about having a speaker come to help explain it, because it's quite tedious in terms of all the various facets. Met with Barbara Omerod-Glenn from Greenwich Library, the director, talking about some of their changes in facility usage and programming. And then also met with Larry Walters, a professor from Brigham Young University, who has been contracted by the state to look at the discussions and results of the tax study panel that was put together by the legislature. Joining me at that meeting was Lauren Elliott, our assessor, as well as Leslie Tarkington from the BET, who is the liaison to the assessor. And clearly they're going around. Mr. Walters is soliciting feedback from communities throughout the state, obviously very diverse communities with different perceptions and views about our tax structure. We certainly gave him an abundance of commentary about what we believe the impacts are in Greenwich and what personally I perceive to be going on as it relates to trying to redistribute the resources. through either state tax policy or through establishment of regional governing bodies. That afternoon, we also had the important decision of appointing one of 2 citizen members to the retirement board. That responsibility is granted by charter to the chairman of the BET, the moderator of the RTM, as well as the first selectman. Before us, we had 2 highly qualified and capable candidates, one of them being the incumbent, John Chadwick, the other being the former chairman of the BET Budget Committee, Joseph Pellegrino. And the decision was made on a 2-to-1 vote to reappoint Mr. John Chadwick as the one of 2 citizen representatives. Finally, future events. We're going to hear more about those shortly, but clearly it's an exciting time for Greenwich. It is Founders Day tomorrow, and we'll hear more about that program. And then on July 27th, we're going to have a ceremony here in this room celebrating 25 years of the enactment of the American with Disabilities Act. This is something that the First Selectmen's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities in Greenwich is going to host. And we want people to be aware of the overall status of what's taken place in town and what more we can do to make the community a more inclusive community for all. Future meetings, there'll be a meeting next week with representatives of various town departments and the Chamber of Commerce to discuss an after-action review of the latest sidewalk sales days. There is certainly opportunity for improvement in the overall management of that activity. I'll also be meeting with Diane Fox, our former town planner, regarding the establishment of historic signs for our historic districts. This is something that she's been working with a whole group called the Greenwich Preservation Network, and we're going to discuss where we stand with that. That concludes my updates. At this time, we'll proceed to the next item, old business. There is presently no old business. What is hanging out there for future meeting is the municipal improvement request for the modular classrooms at Western Middle School. For those who are interested in that, know that the Board of Ed requested that be pulled so that they can adequately evaluate all the various elements of it. It has to get really more specific approval from their board. We anticipate, from what we were told, that that will come up either in late August or early September. So we go to new business, to pleasant items on the agenda. The first one we're going to take is primarily an administrative matter for the board, and that is to grant approval for a road closure for an annual Veterans Day March. This was an activity that was started with the Greenwich, and Bruce Winningham is here, and help me, Bruce, because I remember signing the document. Greenwich Military Covenant of Care. And they have been supported by our friends at the Silver Shield Greenwich Police Department. So we'd like to invite you to come forward and talk about it. I know that there's a special focus this year to this particular celebration.
So we're requesting a road closure. November 11th, Veterans Day, 10 o'clock a.m. Road closure, Greenwich Avenue. We will walk.
Lieutenant, can
World War II
you
monument.
just turn your mic on?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Can you hear me?
It's
This is a.
There you go. I think you got it.
Oh, there we go. How
there.
about now?
Yeah.
Hear it? Okay. Veterans Day, November 11th, we're requesting permission to close Greenwich Avenue briefly as we walk to the World War II Memorial, where Mr. Winningham, who's behind me, will address the crowd. This will be our 4th year, Bruce?
This will be our
4th year, okay? And it's pretty much it.
So the one thing to add is that this year we will
honor the service in the Vietnam War. Last year was World War II. The year before that was Afghanistan and Iraq. And the whole country knows that somehow gestures have been left unmade for all of these years, and towns are beginning to try and find out how to do that. So we're here many months ahead of schedule from when we normally come, because finding that gesture and setting that tone is going to take some time and care. We want to get it right by working with Vietnam veterans here in our town. The only historical thing I'll share is that this year, 2015, is the timeline mark of two very unfortunate years. 50 years since 1965, when we went from being advisors to starting a war with North Vietnam. Then 40 years since the last helicopter left the roof of the Saigon embassy and we ignominiously left. In between, Americans have almost no knowledge of what happened during those 10 years. And so if you served there in peril or lost comrades, you realize no one knows why you were there. And so how do we address this in the brief spirit of time that we have? And the theme, in closing, the theme is called Welcome Home. And we've checked with veterans organizations, Vietnam Veterans Associations across the country, and that has become a sort of a phrase of brotherhood that they use, since their common sense is no one knows what we did and no one said welcome home. So that'll be the theme that we'll find. But we're here early because it's going to take some time to figure it out how to do it right.
Great, thank you, Bruce, for all you do.
LT, thank you.
So at this time, we have a request for specified road closure presented by the Greenwich Police Department. Tuesday, November 11th, location, Amergeron Crossway, road closed for gathering 9:45, road open 10:15, and then the accompanying Greenwich Avenue roads closed for ceremony at 10:30, opens at 11 a.m. This will involve 2 officers for road closure and 2 motor officers for escort. The detour will be Amergeron Crossway, closed from parking lots west to Greenwich Avenue, traffic in lots to Lewis Street to Greenwich Avenue. Further down Greenwich Avenue, there'll be closure from Bruce Place to Havemeyer Place, east on Bruce Place to Havemeyer Place, south on Police Alley, west on Havemeyer Place. So they've delineated those detours. It is very much in keeping with past year's ceremonies. So is there a motion to approve this as presented?
So moved.
Seconded.
Without objection.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you. So now we come to the main event of our meeting today, and that is a presentation by the Greenwich 375th Anniversary Committee. We are pleased to have with us a number of citizens who have devoted their time to help convey the unique history of our town through its various neighborhoods. And I'm pleased to welcome the chairman of this event, Davida Strackbein, to share with us and the rest of the community what is going to take place and has taken place. And you have as much time as you'd like.
Should I give you handouts now?
Certainly.
She's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you.
One of the great assets of the Greenwich community is the rich and diverse history covering the 375 years since the founding of Greenwich in 1640. One might ask, what is history? And why should we preserve and disseminate history, including the history of Greenwich? History is an account of the past. We rely upon evidence to construct such accounts. We should question the reliability of each piece of evidence and recognize that any single piece of evidence is insufficient to build a reliable account of the past. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us to collect additional evidence of our town's past on a continuous basis in order to create a more comprehensive basis for constructing an updated account of the past of Greenwich for dissemination to our citizens and society at large. Examples of unanswered questions related to the account of Greenwich past include the identity of Native American Indians, from whom the July 1640 land purchase was made, the earliest Greenwich record, and in the state of Connecticut recognized as the founding document, the precise dating and location of the original southwestern border between Connecticut and New York, and the resolution of the competing claims to early Greenwich by the Native American Indians, the English, and the Dutch. History is essential to both societies and individuals as it provides information concerning the behavior of societies and individuals, and thereby helps us to understand how the society we live in came to be, as well as the impact of the past upon the present as a source of understanding change in our society. History provides a foundation for citizenship, as it helps us confirm our identity in society and encourages responsible participation in society. Furthermore, history provides insights to people in their vocations and influences their perspective with respect to the direction of our society. In observing the 375th anniversary of Greenwich, we have combined the celebration of the anniversary with an emphasis on programs and events related to the history of Greenwich for the benefit of current and future generations. These activities are the product of extraordinary efforts of another key asset of the Greenwich community, our world-class volunteers and community partners who have generously contributed their time, their talents, and their energy, and the wonderful support of the leadership and members of our town government, who are instrumental in making Greenwich a great place to live. There's insufficient time to address the contributions of each individual and each community partner who has participated in this town-wide community effort to date, but we know that we owe them a deep debt of gratitude. The initial celebration of the 375th anniversary brought together 39 houses of worship throughout Greenwich on the first day of January 2015 for 1 minute at 1 p.m. as the bells in the steeples tolled, and the leaders of the congregations heralded the beginning of this milestone year, recognizing the diversity of religions today versus the wilderness of 1640. On February 22nd, 2015, at Putnam Hill Park, a little-known town pocket park on East Putnam Avenue, today across from Temple Shalom, was rededicated in a joyful celebration replete with fife and drum corps, a police honor guard, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Sons of the American Revolution, and an American Revolutionary War reenactment at Putnam Cottage, and a reinstallation in Putnam Hill Park of a DAR memorial to General Israel Putnam's dramatic escape to seek reinforcements during the pivotal February 1779 Revolutionary War battle in central Greenwich. Starting on May 16, 2015, a series of minibus walking and bicycle tours was initiated in 11 neighborhoods of Greenwich. In order to initiate this series, the district chairs of the representative town meeting were asked to nominate residents in their respective districts as guides to undertake the identification and research related to existing sites and architectural features which contributed to the neighborhood's history and development since its founding. The Neighborhood Tours program included the creation of maps of the neighborhoods and descriptions of the points of historical interest, as well as narrated tours of each neighborhood by resident docent guides. Having given their tours and mapping their neighborhoods for the printed guides, these dedicated volunteers, who gave months of their time, have been asked to join us today to share what they discovered 375 years after the founding of Greenwich was unique about their neighborhood in 2015. The tours covered Old Greenwich, and Pat Larrabee will speak to that.
Thanks, Davida.
My name is Pat Larrabee, and my neighborhood is Old Greenwich. Just wanted to mention that Susan Ferris, Susie Baker, Al Primo, and Pat Mendelson were also supportive of giving me information for the tour. Very much appreciated. What I regard as best about making Old Greenwich unique is that it's the oldest part of Greenwich, obviously. It's where the settlers, Captain Daniel Patrick and Robert Elizabeth Feek, bought the land from the native people in 1640. It has the town's first church, first cemeteries, and it's where the Greenwich Historical Society itself was founded in 1931, with meetings in Perrott Library. Much of the current beauty of Old Greenwich, which I consider to be Binney Park, Perrott Library, and the Helen Binney Kitchell Natural Park, is thanks to the efforts and generosity of the Edwin Binney family and architect Dan Everett Wade. The rest of the Old Greenwich, the point, is covered by a separate tour. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Is tomorrow last part of this?
Now, Vinnie DeMarco will address Pemberwick Glenville.
9 o'clock.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thanks to the whole team, the 375th team, Davida, Mary Ellen, Joseph, Heidi, for your persistence and major assistance in making the Pemberwick Glenville tour happen. To Christopher and others for your historical support, and to First Selectman Peter Tessie for your foresight in putting this together. For us, the tour was certainly an opportunity to produce a snapshot of life in the area, but it was also one to confirm and enhance the identity of an area of town somewhat unfamiliar to many residents across town, and even a surprising number of town officials. To retrace the evolution of the area that once was a valuable agricultural and manufacturing source on the power of the Byram River. Today, very little is produced in the PG area beyond some great chili and pizza, but on the strength of its rich history and generations of proud blue-collar families, it remains a very unique part of town, quietly boasting incredible amenities within walking or biking distance, natural features like the river and ponds, parks and trails, wonderfully successful models of adaptive reuse like the mill and the civic center, and a top-tier elementary school, the renowned Boy Scout reservation, privately operated clubs to serve and honor veterans and hold social affairs, and a complete downtown with a fully staffed and strongly backed fire company at its core. It is our hope that generations to come will look back to this time and see what we were doing to preserve and enhance this valuable corner of Greenwich. We believe the 375th anniversary team has achieved that goal, and we're proud to be included.
Thank you. Riverside, Jack Moffley and Bruce Barker.
First of all, I'd like to commend Davida Strackbond for the job she's done in bringing this entire group together and getting the job done. And also Heidi Smith, who did a terrific job of putting these maps together. Heidi was is Heidi here today? No. Oh, it's too bad. Well, anyway, about Riverside, it's interesting. we've heard from Old Greenwich, and actually Old Greenwich and Riverside are very much alike because they had their roots in the same place. At one time they were one town. In fact, they were part of Stamford, which I discovered. Didn't realize that. Early on, they were split off. But interestingly enough, most of the action, the early colonial action, occurred in Old Greenwich. Riverside was somewhat isolated by virtue of geography, with the Long Meadow Creek, creek on one side, which and the enormous marshes that were now Benny Park on the east side, and on the west side, the Minas River. So the transportation and ability to be a part of the overall town was limited mostly by water transportation. In any event, all of this changed. It was all farming and fishing and shellfishing in those days, but it changed radically with the bridge across the Minas River in 1848. So most of the work that we did in our committee focused on that period at post-1848, where there was an enormous real estate boom, even greater than we have today, relatively speaking. It became a magnet for successful publishers, wealthy publishers. Those were the days when publishers were wealthy, by the way. And also it attracted many people who were in the arts, writing and so on. In any event, it was a fascinating period to study because many of the people we talked to on the tour were not aware, for example, of that fantastic, enormous estate at the very end of Riverside, down the southern tip of Riverside, the Longleaf Estate, which is now Harbor Point. A few of the former residents, or I should say settler families, the Lowthers, for example. We've got George Lowther, fourth. He now can brag a fifth. So we have a continuity through the ages, and say nothing of the Ferrises as well. A fascinating time. We found that it was some unique features of Riverside that we were not aware of, and we appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you. Adding to that, I just want to say that Bruce Barker and Nancy have one of the plaqued houses in town, a beautifully renovated house. Nancy Osmer was also in our group, and she was a great help. She occupies a site that was former site of one of the great muckrakers and authors in the convent of Theodore Roosevelt. Any event, a lot of things came out of this that we didn't know about. Thank you.
I'd like to make one comment. The one thing that I think we all enjoyed and we wished could have happened more is that maybe we could have had a bigger bus and share it with more people in our community. And I think many of the other people who did the tours probably feel the same way. Thank you.
Okay, that's an interesting. Thank you very much. Lovely.
We couldn't get a bigger bus where we went.
Well, that was. There are complications, and I've learned a lot about the tour business. The next one is the Stanwich Historic District, and Debbie Reynolds could not be with us today, but she has sent the 14th generation Stanwich family representative, Carter Reynolds.
So yeah, that is correct. It's been 13 or 14 generations, I think. I'm still brushing up on the history myself, but I think my ancestors sailed over as early as anyone else, and they eventually made their way down to Greenwich, and they ended up expanding the Horseneck area. So anyways, I'm honored to be here on behalf of my family, and it's a pleasure to speak in front of you guys. But so thank you for having me. So in 1640, as you guys know, the town of Greenwich was founded in Old Greenwich, and by 1672 it expanded into Horseneck, which is also known as Greenwich proper. And in 1731, a group of farmers in the northeast Greenwich and northwest Stamford region petitioned the government in Hartford to create a new town with its own church and school, because they wanted to situate it near their homes and workplace rather than commuting with what was much more difficult to commute back then. So this was not a land division expanding the area of the growing town of Greenwich, but instead it was an entirely new community with its own government. And as you can imagine, the petition was granted. So a new ecclesiastical community was established with the Stanwich Congregational Church as its centerpiece, which is still there and used regularly today. The separate settlement lasted for 163 years until 1894, so from 1731 until then. As you probably know, colonial life was founded on an agricultural base, and Stanwich was definitely no exception. In the 18th century, the farmers and their families were hardworking, independent, self-sufficient, which resulted for them in a comfortable and prosperous life. The farmers always had a ready market in New York, and they carted their goods to the lower landing and nearby Coscob, where they loaded them onto packed boats and sloops, which sailed regularly, almost daily. At one time, Greenwich farmers were said to actually have controlled the entire potato market in New York, which was a fun little tidbit. However, with the advent of the railroads in the 1870s, farming in Greenwich was no longer a viable way of life. So the town of Stanwich, the then town of Stanwich, dwindled as the government no longer mandated an ecclesiastical society. And so although its official township had ended, the area has endured and thrived as a lovely, peaceful enclave in the backcountry of Greenwich ever since. Thanks.
Thank you, Carter. It's lovely to see another generation come forward. Now, Dean Gamanos will speak to the Fourth Ward.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. David, I want to echo the appreciation that all of us feel for your great stewardship of this project. I'd also like to thank Heidi and Christopher for their work. Christopher's been a big help. He helped provide the photos that you'll see in our brochure. And is Ed Kantorski here tonight? I don't think he today, but his wife is. He did a superb job, I think, and I hope you spend the time to go through these individual brochures, because this is a very talented gentleman, and it was a lot of work, and we certainly appreciate it. For those of you, probably most of you know where the Fourth Ward is, but for those who may not, we're just north of the Post Road, above the Central Business District. Church Street is one of the boundaries. Sherwood Place is on the other side. Goes up to Northfield, Division Street, and William Street. It was one of the town's first original developments, subdivisions, developed by William Sherwood. He first plotted it in 1836, but it really started to blossom with the advent of the railroad, which came in the middle of the 19th century. It was largely settled by Irish immigrants, and some of you may wonder, well, where's the Third Ward? Where's the Second Ward? Is there a Fifth Ward? There's only one Fourth Ward, and apparently it was named after a Fourth Ward in Manhattan that was a largely Irish neighborhood that one of our famous or infamous residents had been involved with, Boss Tweed. But there were other immigrants as well. It was largely a very heterogeneous community. There were Polish immigrants, there were Italians. There were also Old English families. The oldest house on Sherwood is the John Knapp House, built in 1837. Putnam Tavern was originally Putnam House was originally Knapp's Tavern, and I think that's where the house and the Knapp family derived from. There's also the John Kirk House, which was built in 1838. So there's some great old houses in the neighborhood, and there's some old churches. The first church in Greenwich, actually, St. Mary's, the first Catholic church, it's not there anymore. It moved to Greenwich Avenue a few decades later, but there was also a cemetery right on the corner of William Street and Church Street. And there was a school, a Catholic school. This is to serve the growing immigrant community there. Some of the people on the tour were asking, well, are the bodies still under the playground there? I said, no. They were moved to St. Mary's Cemetery, which is out on North Street. But I have to admit, it was some research and some work, but it was a labor of love. It's so interesting to learn about the rich history of this town, and I'm very fortunate to live in the Fourth Ward because it's a great place to live. It has a rich tradition. It's really an embodiment of the Greenwich itself, of all the different people living together harmoniously. The First Baptist Church is in the Fourth Ward, and so we have African Americans, we have people from upper classes, lower classes, middle classes. It's a great place to live. I'd also like to say that a lot of the old houses that you can see in our brochure are coming down, and I'm a little saddened by this. They're small houses on relatively larger plots, usually long and narrow, and some of them are giving way to larger condominiums. A lot of them are in good taste. They're typical of the neighborhood and their architectural style, but I think we need help for some of these old houses because their numbers are dwindling and it's part of the town's history. Thank you.
I think you can tell that each of the tours was as unique as the community in which the neighborhood is situated. The next speaker is Lou Caravella. Mr. Caravella, you're up. Oh, well, come and say. He told us that he was at the last major celebration in 1940. But he...
Good morning. I want to echo my thanks also to the society here for bringing us forward here. I really didn't come prepared with anything. However, I have in the last 3 or 4 years have done a tour of Coscob. I started at Indian Field Road. Of course, that's not Coscob, but everyone thinks that's where Coscob begins, but Salem Street actually is the beginning of Coscob. So I went down the south side and the north side and took all the houses or all the businesses that are today and those that have been 80 years before that. And I, too, were amazed at what I found out. So, like the Coscober, for instance, it was a gas station, it was a shoe store, and it's 2 different restaurant owners are in there. And as we go down to like Toyota and all, we had a little shack there called Dirty Lou's for use. Well, you're all too young to remember Dirty Lou's. He made the best chili. John, I'm sorry, didn't mean to offend you. He made the best chili in town. But it was just a little hamburger and a hot dog joint. And it was always crowded. And he always had a cigarette in his mouth. Never without a cigarette. And 80% of the times, the ashes went in the chili. That's what made it so good. As we progressed up the road, of course, you all know Starbucks, Mill Pond, the previous owners were gas stations and so on. There were, at one time, 2 banks in Coscob and 8 gas stations. Now there's 10 banks in Coscob with 2 gas stations. So it shows you the revolution has taken place on the post road in Coscob. And of course, Coscob was the hub of the town. It was the central place, actually, where people all met. Coscob was designated as the hub of Greenwich. And that's why when Coscobians speak about the hub, it's right where CVS is today. And John Callahan and the state and the Bank of America is there. That's where the hub was. And as I traveled all the way along, especially like with the clam box, which we were all sorry to see it go, and the apartments that they built there and the banks that are in there. And I have to tell the story a little about the Dr. Bergen's house. Dr. Bergen was the health department chairman for the town of Greenwich, in I guess you want to say the 40s. And on that corner, where the Carvel was on the post road where Toyota is today, Lou Sattini bought that building and opened up the Dairy Queen. And next door is the Dunkin' Donuts. And then we proceeded with the station. One last story, I want to take up all the time. As you were coming down, most of you, or those of you who know, that I was in business for 35 years at the stationery shop in Costco. And every Saturday night, I used to go and pick up what was the Bulldog edition of the news, the daily news at the Stamford Railroad Station. Coming down St. Catherine's Hill, we had a restaurant there. And I'm coming down the hill, it was almost 7:30 at night, and I see these guys all surrounding these buildings. I said, man, if that doesn't look like a holdup, I don't know what is. So I rushed back to the store, I called the police department, and they said, we've just been informed. The manager of that restaurant was on the 10 most wanted list of the FBI. I almost blew the whole thing. But anyway, Costco's a great community to live in. I've been there since 1953, raised all my kids there. And I always think of the harbor, of all the bridge incident where it went down in 1983, and back to where it was, the big fight we had to get the roads changed and all of that. And the people of Costco and all the other communities, I'm sure as well, embrace the town of Greenwich. Thank you very much.
Now, God's Cobb had a little different story to tell. So Carol Burns, Deborah Mecke, and Deborah Mecke are going to share the story.
Well, I also am unprepared today. Hi, thank you. I've been in Costco. I've lived there since 1969 and in the town since 1961. And it was really a treat to be invited to be involved with these great people. And I learned a lot about the history of Costco, even though I've lived there all that time. And thanks to Christopher and Deborah especially, you know, we started out at the lower landing. And as you've heard, all the packet ships that used to go back and forth to New York City, and all the history that was revolved around there, and all the wonderful things that have happened. And most recently, they have led the charge to establish a new national historic list in Costco. And it actually begins at my home on River Road, which is 60, goes down to Mead Avenue and up Mead Avenue and down Weather Vane Lane. And that was where we concentrated a lot of the time, on all those wonderful old houses that were built there. And I think the earliest house on Mead Avenue was 1835. So we had the opportunity to learn a lot about those homes and the different styles that are there. My piece of the tour was not a happy piece. It was the coming down of the Mianus River Bridge and how that affected the neighborhood back then. It was very hard to go back, living through that in the what they called the diesel triangle, to go back and read about what had happened then. But the thing that was so amazing was how the neighbors all came together, every single person who lived around there, and really it became a separate community almost within the town. And raising the money and hiring an attorney and working with the town, and especially with the health department, because they're determining that it was a health risk for all the people who lived there, really moved the state along to finish the bridge and to open the roads much sooner than they had anticipated. But it was, I think it was the spirit of everyone who lives in Greenwich. You know, even though we're a town, we're a very small community, it's so diverse, people have lived here for such a long time. I know I can never go out with running into somebody that I've known for a long time. So it's a very friendly place and a wonderful place to live. I am going to be leaving Cascab, but I will be staying in Greenwich, hopefully, for my next few years. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Mecke, Executive Director of the Greenwich Historical Society, and I've been a resident of Cascab since 1996. I had the pleasure of leading 55 people on the first ever walking tour of the River Road, Mead Avenue Historic District, and of course that was along with Carol Burns and also Mary Ellen Labine, who shared some information from the oral histories done from residents of Cascab. The River Road, Mead Avenue Historic District has the distinction of being the most recent neighborhood in Greenwich to be listed on the National Register. Its nomination was the joint work of the town's Planning and Zoning Office and the Historical Society in 2014. And it had a very successful indirect outcome when the neighborhood rallied to support the district, and an application to demolish the Cascab Inn was withdrawn and then resubmitted as a restoration and enlargement of the existing structure. This neighborhood, where the inn is located and that Carol described to you, was originally the William H. Mead Farm. It was located between the lower and upper landings in Mianus and Cascab, and between the Post Road and the Mianus River. These landings were among the three busiest ports in Greenwich, the other being Steamboat Road. Farmer Mead decided to divide his farm into 1/2 acre lots, and between 1835 and 1910, all the buildings that contribute to this historic district were built, and they remained pretty much intact until a World War II building boom resulted in the further subdivision of those properties. What we discovered upon a deeper investigation was what was once the most prestigious neighborhood in the village of Cascab. In the 19th century, Mead Avenue was Cascab's Fifth Avenue, and River Road was its Riverside Drive. The walking tour highlighted 18 notable historic resources, including stone walls, 3 carriage houses, and an extraordinary range of mid-19th century Victorian and early 20th century architectural styles. This range of architecture was made possible in our town by the railroad, which then, and the possible, once the mass-produced lumber and decorative elements that could be shipped here, and were a wonderful, cheap alternative to the old post and beam constructions that were done in such buildings as the Bush Alley House, of course, built in 1730 on the Cascab Landing. The prominent residents of the River Road, Mead Avenue included 3 sea captains, several bank presidents, a piano manufacturer, the superintendent of schools, and several local businesses and civic leaders. This area is still one of the best examples of a pre-World War II upper middle class neighborhood in the town as a whole. Thank you.
My name is Christopher Shields, and I'm the Curator of Archives at the Greenwich Historical Society. I could tell when attending the first organizational meeting for the 375th anniversary tours that there was a very enthusiastic, dedicated, and talented group of people joining together to share the rich history of Greenwich, focusing on the town's distinctive neighborhoods and communities. And I was extremely pleased that the tour organizers turned to the research library and archives at the Greenwich Historical Society. It was a pleasure helping them build on what they already knew about their locations, drawing on the archive's extraordinary collections of primary source material, including ephemera, manuscripts, 18th and 19th century maps, and of course photographs. The files of the Historical Society's Greenwich Landmark Recognition Program were also of great use as the writers highlighted the surviving architectural treasures around town. Happily, images of collection items were effectively used to illustrate the tour brochures prepared for attendees and helped to reinforce the presentations of the tour leaders. I am fortunate to work every day with researchers as they explore the people and places that over decades and centuries have made the town of Greenwich what it is today. The hard work and dedication of Davida Strackbein, the 375th Committee, and those involved in preparing the community tours have helped to share the rich history with a wider audience while celebrating an important anniversary. The enthusiastic attendance of the community tours shows how important the history of place is to many who call Greenwich home. I have spoken with people who attended the tours and have expressed an interest in visiting the archives at the Greenwich Historical Society to learn even more about their communities and homes. Helping to ignite such interest is but one notable success of the 375th celebration. Thank you very much.
The next is Byram. Patricia Bayardi Kantorsky. She said I could use Kantorsky, but Joseph Kantorsky is the graphic designer that is the sole 375th anniversary designer.
Restaurant was on the 10 most wanted list of the FBI. I almost blew the whole thing. But anyway, Coscob's a great community to live in. I've been there since 1953, raised all my kids there, and I always think of the harbor, of all the bridge incident where it went down in 1983, and back to where it was, the big fight we had to get the roads changed and all of that. And the people of Coscob and all the other communities, I'm sure as well, embraced the town of Greenwich. Thank you very much.
Now, Coscob had a little different story to tell. So Carol Burns, Deborah Mecke, and Deborah Mecke are going to share the story.
Well, I also am unprepared today. Hi, thank you. I've been in Coscob. I've lived there since 1969 and in the town since 1961. And it was really a treat to be invited to be involved with these great people. And I learned a lot about the history of Coscob, even though I've lived there all that time. And thanks to Christopher and Deborah especially, you know, we started out at the lower landing, and as you've heard, all the packet ships that used to go back and forth to New York City, and all the history that was revolved around there, and all the wonderful things that have happened. And most recently, they have led the charge to establish a new national historic list in Coscob. And it actually begins at my home on River Road, which is 60, goes down to Mead Avenue and up Mead Avenue and down Weathervane Lane. And that was where we concentrated a lot of the time on all those wonderful old houses that were built there. And I think the earliest house on Mead Avenue was 1835. So we had the opportunity to learn a lot about those homes and the different styles that are there. My piece of the tour was not a happy piece. It was the coming down of the Mianus River Bridge and how that affected the neighborhood back then. It was very hard to go back, living through that in the what they called the diesel triangle, to go back and read about what had happened then. But the thing that was so amazing was how the neighbors all came together, every single person who lived around there, and really it became a separate community almost within the town, and raising the money and hiring an attorney and working with the town and especially with the health department because they're determining that it was a health risk for all the people who lived there, really moved the state along to finish the bridge and to open the roads much sooner than they had anticipated. But it was, I think it was the spirit of everyone who lives in Greenwich. You know, even though we're a town, we're a very small community, it's so diverse, people have lived here for such a long time. I know I can never go out with running into somebody that I've known for a long time. So it's a very friendly place and a wonderful place to live. I am going to be leaving Coscob, but I will be staying in Greenwich, hopefully, for my next few years. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Mecke, Executive Director of the Greenwich Historical Society, and I've been a resident of Coscob since 1996. I had the pleasure of leading 55 people on the first ever walking tour of the River Road, Mead Avenue Historic District. And of course, that was along with Carol Burns and also Mary Ellen Labine, who shared some information from the oral histories done from residents of Cos Cob. The River Road, Mead Avenue Historic District has the distinction of being the most recent neighborhood in Greenwich to be listed on the National Register. Its nomination was the joint work of the town's Planning and Zoning Office and the Historical Society in 2014. And it had a very successful indirect outcome when the neighborhood rallied to support the district, and an application to demolish the Cos Cob Inn was withdrawn and then resubmitted as a restoration and enlargement of the existing structure. This neighborhood, where the inn is located and that Carol described to you, was originally the William H. Mead Farm. It was located between the lower and upper landings in Mianus and Cos Cob, and between the Post Road and the Mianus River. These landings were among the three busiest ports in Greenwich, the other being Steamboat Road. Farmer Mead decided to divide his farm into 1/2 acre lots, and between 1835 and 1910, all the buildings that contribute to this historic district were built, and they remained pretty much intact until a World War II building boom resulted in the further subdivision of those properties. What we discovered upon a deeper investigation was what was once the most prestigious neighborhood in the village of Cos Cob. In the 19th century, Mead Avenue was Cos Cob's Fifth Avenue, and River Road was its Riverside Drive. The walking tour highlighted 18 notable historic resources, including stone walls, 3 carriage houses, and an extraordinary range of mid-19th century Victorian and early 20th century architectural styles. This range of architecture was made possible in our town by the railroad, which then, and the possible, once the mass-produced lumber and decorative elements that could be shipped here, and were a wonderful, cheap alternative to the old post and beam constructions that were done in such buildings as the Bush Alley House, of course, built in 1730 on the Cos Cob Landing. The prominent residents of the River Road, Mead Avenue included 3 sea captains, several bank presidents, a piano manufacturer, the superintendent of schools, and several local businesses and civic leaders. This area is still one of the best examples of a pre-World War II upper-middle-class neighborhood in the town as a whole. Thank you.
My name is Christopher Shields, and I'm the Curator of Archives at the Greenwich Historical Society. I could tell when attending the first organizational meeting for the 375th anniversary tours that there was a very enthusiastic, dedicated, and talented group of people joining together to share the rich history of Greenwich, focusing on the town's distinctive neighborhoods and communities. And I was extremely pleased that the tour organizers turned to the research library and archives at the Greenwich Historical Society. It was a pleasure helping them build on what they already knew about their locations, drawing on the archive's extraordinary collections of primary source material, including ephemera, manuscripts, 18th and 19th century maps, and of course photographs. The files of the Historical Society's Greenwich Landmark Recognition Program were also of great use as the writers highlighted the surviving architectural treasures around town. Happily, images of collection items were effectively used to illustrate the tour brochures prepared for attendees and helped to reinforce the presentations of the tour leaders. I am fortunate to work every day with researchers as they explore the people and places that over decades and centuries have made the town of Greenwich what it is today. The hard work and dedication of Davida Strackbein, the 375th Committee, and those involved in preparing the community tours have helped to share the rich history with a wider audience while celebrating an important anniversary. The enthusiastic attendance of the community tours shows how important the history of place is to many who call Greenwich home. I have spoken with people who attended the tours and have expressed an interest in visiting the archives at the Greenwich Historical Society to learn even more about their communities and homes. Helping to ignite such interest is but one notable success of the 375th celebration. Thank you very much.
The next is Byram. Patricia Bayardi Kantorsky. She said I could use Kantorsky, but Joseph Kantorsky is the graphic designer that is the sole 375th anniversary designer.
I want to begin by thanking Davida for the vision of this 375th anniversary and all her hard work and perseverance. And I want to thank my husband for his graphic design, for the website and the bulletin display cases in town, and this board and all the brochures. I know how hard he worked on it and enjoyed it too. Byram is in the extreme southwest part of Greenwich, and it has a unique history. We're the very densest part of town, and my talk focused on the downtown area of Byram and how it changed from a farming community in the 1600s to what we see today. And Byram was very lucky in the sense that most of the buildings that were built at the turn of the century are still there. Byram, and I also was very pleased to learn in my research that Byram is not called Byram because you buy rum from the Indians, which seemed to be the case that I had heard all the time that I've lived in Byram for 31 years. And it is still a theory of mine, but I think it holds water. And in my research, I discovered that Thomas Lyon and John Banks in 1676 were granted their farmland in 360 acres in Byram and when they were granted it, it was called Byram Neck. And no coincidence that they were from Byram, England. So if putting the two and two together, most towns in New England are named after the towns where the people that settled it came from. So that's a new theory I hope gets spread around. But the person that was most instrumental in making the downtown Byram area was Milo Mead, and he and his brother Mark Mead inherited all the farmland in Byram, except for the Lyon farm, from their father, and in the late 1800s. And Mark quickly sold off his portion, which was where Byram Shore Road is now, to the wealthy businessmen to build what they call their summer cottages. And but Milo had a different vision, and his vision was to sell it to developers, the land, very slowly, different portions, and the developers divided the land into, for the most part, in 50 by 100-foot lots. They did not build the houses, but they built the streets, and they divided the land, and they made restrictions that would keep it a good neighborhood, a good town. And when they did that and sold them off, they sold them over a long period of time, and then they just kept growing. And therefore, another theory of mine, that all the houses in Byram look very different, even though they were developed with these small parcels of land. And that's because they were sold as land only over a 100-year period. And therefore, the style of architecture is similar to the style that was popular at the time. So, and then when I-95 came through, the houses that were in the way of I-95 were actually moved to the empty lots in Byram, and making it a little more eclectic than it already was. The other interesting point of Byram was that by the 1920s, 90% of Byram was of foreign descent. And just to bring the whole thing together, the development came together because the three most important ingredients for to build the community were that work, transportation, and land. The land I had spoken of earlier was the farmland that had been divided and sold, and the work was along the quarries, which you can still see on Byram Beach and Park, and along Byram River there were mills and foundries and factories and lumber yards and mill shops, and they lined both sides of the river. And then transportation with the railroad in 1947, and to my surprise, huge schooners and barges that came up on the Byram River to bring the raw materials and bring the goods back. And so that's what we see today. All right, welcome.
The next is Chickahominy, Byram Park, and Byram Shore. Cheryl Denson.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't also echo the thanks to DeVita and to the committee for their research and editing and graphic design. I led the tours of a bus tour of Chickahominy and Byram. And in reflecting on it, I think that these communities are unique in that there are two elements that combine. One is the imprint of history is visible both. It's starting off with buildings and place names, so you could see history. So, for example, Hamilton Avenue School, which was opened in 1915, even though it experienced many renovations and expansions over the years, the key section of the facade is remaining, so if a student from 1915 were to come back, they would recognize it. Armstrong Court, which was 1951 Architecture Award-winning public housing development. Neil Armstrong, who was our town's first housing committee chair, would recognize Armstrong Court today. Or even a place name like New Lebanon. That was, we just had Patricia talk about Milo Mead. He coined the phrase New Lebanon because he was so enamored of the cedar trees in Byram, and that brought to mind passages from the Bible of the cedars of Lebanon. But the imprint is not only just felt in the place names and in the buildings, but also in the continuing traditions. And that's what really, I thought, makes these two communities so unique. One we have coming up, which is the Feast of St. Roch's. That church was built by the Italian immigrant community in the early turn of the 20th century. It was opened in 1928. And that feast, or in Italian, which isn't very good for me, La Festa di San Rocco, is one that was actually carried over from the town in Italy from which many of the immigrants came. And that feast continues on from that time in the 20s till today, and this year it's being celebrated from August 12th through the 15th. And then you have something else which Patricia brought up, which is the Sokol Gym Club in Byram. Even though the building, the initial building is no longer there, it was organized by the Czech and Slovak. Byram was settled primarily by those immigrant populations. And in 1898, they organized a club, and their motto was a sound mind and a healthy body is a way of life. And the Sokol Club, even though it's in a different building and has continued since 1898, still has a strong athletic and fitness motto and activity program. So I think in some Byram and Chickahomany's buildings and place names and continued traditions are all what contribute to the historical fabric of our cherished and venerable town. Thank you.
Aren't they wonderful tours? I mean, really, just Helen O'Malley and Louisa Stone will talk about northwestern Greenwich.
Come on, Louisa. When I was asked to do this, I thought, I was just going to be a docent on a bus. Well, it kept growing and growing. Thanks to Davida and to Chris, we were able to do not only a bus tour, it was 2 bus tours, because we live in the back country, and it's probably the largest area in Greenwich. We're very fortunate because it is zoned to 4 acres, and so we still have a lot of open land. We also have the Greenwich Land Trust, which is just, their headquarters are now in our area, and they are protecting it. We have country clubs, we have schools. Everything is protecting the land. I started out thinking, when we went to the first meeting, I was very, very impressed because one of the docents is descended from Elizabeth Feek. I thought, wow, that's fantastic, Patricia. And then I realized also that Elizabeth Feek left the Massachusetts Bay Colony because of John Winthrop, who was a rather oppressive individual. And the 11th generation of John Winthrop lived in our area on John Street. And so that was a lovely connection. I think I found that, first of all, the people that I have met, all of you people, very impressed with you. I was very, very lucky to call Louisa Stone because she has a brain that is just full of history of Greenwich because she has served in so many capacities. I was also lucky to have Arto Zabo, who helped with photography of the current buildings. We have a lot of 1,700 buildings in our area, which I think that surprised me. I love the stories and had a great time telling some of the stories on the bus tour. Starting with the Round Hill Community House, I used to lead the youth fellowship, and when the hostages were taken in Iran, I had the kids put out a long, long piece of paper in the hall, and they wrote to the hostages. Remarkably, several years later, when the hostages were released, Kennedy, I remember his wife's name, Louisa Kennedy, but maybe some of you remember, Kennedy, who was one of the hostages, came to the community house, and there I was, sitting in the audience, and there he was sitting in front. And so I raised my hand and I said, I just want you to know that from this building, I hope you received a message from the Youth Fellowship many years ago. Another story, which is very fascinating, is that the Meads, we heard about them, they were very, very active. And on John Street, there's a new house. And the story I told was that Silence Deliverance Mead lived here, and he and his son built their house by cutting down trees and building a house. The people who live there today, all of the stone on the outside of that house comes from the Yangtze River in China. Now that's quite a difference. I don't think Silas Deliverance Mead could ever have imagined such a thing happening. It's interesting today to listen to all the people talking about the Byram River. The Byram River flows in the back of my property, and there were many, many mills along the way and factories. One of the factories was the Wilcox factory, and Mr. Wilcox built a sled for 9 people, a wagon, and he would transport his family, 5 children, up to North Greenwich Congregational, then go back and pick up more neighbors. That was a lovely story. We stopped at the Field Griffin House, which dates back to the 1700s, and the owner of that house spoke to us about the farming, and we heard about the packet boats. Well, North Greenwich contributed a great deal of the produce that went to New York. one of the very, very fascinating things in concluding is that I discovered, Louisa knew this story very well, but that the United Nations wanted to put their headquarters up in North Greenwich. And if they had done that, 100 square miles would have been a city. And the New York Housatonic Railroad wanted to go through there, and it didn't, because people cared. Concerned citizens cared, and they defeated the United Nations. And actually, the railroad didn't go through because Silas Edward Mead thought it was a good idea, but the man who was the contractor was not paying the workers. And so there was a court situation in White Plains. Silas Edward went there, and the contractors didn't show up. End of railroad. So I thank you for all the work you do, and I thank all of you for all the work you have done.
Go ahead.
Good morning. As you probably know, I can talk endlessly, and if given a chance, I think we could have many more tours. Helen didn't mention how we really felt there were hundreds of people who would like to know more about Northwest Greenwich as well as other parts of town. We were fortunate that the Round Hill Community Church has an art gallery, I believe Helen did mention, with the help of Arto Szabo, putting up an exhibit of photographs, pictures taken historically and currently. And we had a slideshow with a PowerPoint, and we published a 24-page booklet so people can learn more about Northwest Greenwich. I believe that DeVita plans that the Historical Society will assemble more out of all the work that has gone into the 375th, and we all look forward to being here for the 400th. Yay!
It's interesting how these ideas develop, isn't it? The next is Sue Baker and Chris Franco, who will be at the Founders Day tour, leading the Founders Day tour tomorrow.
Thank you to everybody. It was really fun to hear all your tales. Coscob, your 83 crash of the bridge changed the sleep habits of all of Greenwich, because Greenwich High School had to open at 7:30 in order to accommodate the school buses to do the circuitous route to get the kids to the high school and then go back to do the elementary school. And speaking of school bus, Riverside, we planned ahead. We are down with the school bus tomorrow, so we've got space. You all come. We are where it all began, the founders, the colonial times, with Elizabeth Feek, that wonderful woman, also known as the Winthrop woman, because John Winthrop was not only her uncle, but her father-in-law. And we thank Anya Seaton for all the information we have about her. So where it all began was Monacoego with the Native Americans who traded for coats from Elizabeth Feek and her husband. And then it became called Elizabeth's Neck, which included not only the islands that are now Greenwich Point, because there were no causeways and it was only tidally accessible, but all the way up into Old Greenwich. So after Elizabeth's Neck, the development was mostly done by a wonderful gentleman named J. Kennedy Todd. And so now that area was referred to as Todd's Point, as well as Innis Arden, because that was the name of his entire estate. His docks, his golf courses, and all. And finally now, we call it Greenwich Point. It's just my favorite place to be. It is my beloved point where I think I've spent a good part of the last 47 years of my life here, especially every day in the winter with my wonderful Greenwich High School students on field trips in honors oceanography and marine biology. Elizabeth, the original, has a lot of history to offer to our whole town. And so our tour tomorrow will focus not only on the Native American beginnings there, but on all the colonial times and what has come since then. And so Chris wants to tell you about where we will go from Elizabeth's Monacoego and Elizabeth's Neck, Todd Point, to Greenwich Point.
Thank you, Susie. And we also would like to thank the committee and DeVita in particular for all the great work that you've done. To just sort of mention a few other highlights of our tour tomorrow, one of the really exciting places that we're going to visit, we think it's exciting, is the Jeffrey Ferris homestead, which is at 181 Shore Road. And it's been known for many years for those of us who grew up in town as being one of the oldest buildings in town, but it was sort of lost over the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. And, you know, it was hidden behind a hedge. And then about a year ago, a demolition sign went up down there. And a number of folks in town, including the Greenwich Point Conservancy and the Greenwich Preservation Trust and the Greenwich Historical Society and concerned citizens rallied. And under the leadership of the Conservancy, we've been able to put together a plan to save and restore that building. It was Jeffrey Ferris's homestead. He purchased, what we do know is that he purchased the property from Elizabeth Phones Winthrop Feek Hallett in 1653, and he died in 1666. And so what we would like to establish over the next months is the actual provenance of the various parts of the house, because we know that it's been modified over the years, but we also think that there are significant original aspects of it. One of the really exciting finds that just occurred within the last couple of months by a young man named Rob Otto, who was doing work at the New York Library Archives. He unearthed some previously unknown letter from William Hallett, Elizabeth Feek's husband, that was written in the month that they moved, when they sold the property in 1653 and they moved to Queens. And it was written to John Winthrop, and it references the sale of their properties to Jeffrey Ferris, including their house. And so we know that Elizabeth Feek sold her property and her house. So one of the links that we're trying to put together is whether the Jeffrey Ferris house was in fact Elizabeth Feek's house, which would make it not only the oldest house in Greenwich, but the first house in Greenwich. So these are things that we have yet to prove, but it's all very exciting and it's happening in real time. One of the other great things is that in connection with this plan, a preservation easement was put on the house a couple of months ago, so it will never be demolished. And when it's restored, it will be retained in its restored state. Another interesting site that I have a particular interest in is the Harbor House Inn, which is at 164 Shore Road. It was originally called the Crossway Inn when it was built in 1895, and it's the sole surviving seashore inn in Old Greenwich. And these inns were actually very important in the development of Old Greenwich. Around the turn of the late 19th century, there were 11 inns in Old Greenwich, and folks from New York City would come out and stay at the inns. And in fact, Mr. and Mrs. Todd came and they stayed at one or several of the seashore inns, and which was how they learned about the neighborhood and ended up buying their property down at Todd's Point. So, but for the seaside inns down in Old Greenwich in the late 1800s, we may not have Todd's Point today. So that the Harbor House is also going to be restored over the coming months, and it'll be become residential units. But it's exciting to know that that landmark is going to continue to exist in Old Greenwich as well. So these are a couple of our highlights. We have our tour tomorrow, and we look forward to it, and we hope that, I know that some of you will be joining us, and we look forward to that. Thank you.
That finishes the tours, and you can tell from the individuals who have spoken that this is an outstanding group of individuals. They live in the communities, they learned about their communities, they researched their communities, and they shared that history for the benefit of the town. Those brochures feature the highlights, but they give you very little evidence of the commitment of this extraordinary group of individuals. I would love to give you the bios of each one because they're so outstanding, but it would be another hour. So I can't, but we do owe them a terrific debt of gratitude for their outstanding commitment to the community and to the betterment of the community to bring the town of Greenwich together. Thank you.
Thank you. Davida, thank you again for
I'm not done yet.
identifying and bringing together such a wonderful group of individuals.
Oh, really?
that have
I did
contributed.
nothing. They did all the work. I mean, this is an extraordinary group of individuals.
So you have an eye for talent.
I do want to continue on with the events just a little bit. So on July 3rd, the Independence Day fireworks were held on a lovely summer evening at Binney Park to the largest crowd ever, and Greenwich Point by the Greenwich Department of Parks and Rec. And what is really incredible is that it was such a community event that there wasn't any problem. I mean, think about it. Thousands and thousands of people took that little road going all the way out there. And I think it's just a testament to our town government and to the people who serve our community. Outstanding work. On July 4th, our community partner, Independence Day Association of Greenwich, held the 4th of July ceremony for community participants on the steps of Town Hall, which included patriotic music and remembrances, citizenship awards, patriotic readings, refreshments, and a 4th of July flag raising in honor of Independence Day. And again, this was broke all records for attendance, and it was an extraordinary day, and it was lovely weather too. Tomorrow, on July 18th, a Founders' Day commemoration of the 375th anniversary of the founding of Greenwich. On July 18th, 1640 will take place at Innisarden Cottage at Greenwich Point, with light refreshments and the accompaniment of the Greenwich Symphony Brass Band. The program will include the First Selectmen's welcome and commemoration remarks of attending dignitaries, and the proposed dedication of a 375th anniversary plaque on display to be installed on Greenwich Point as a memorial to the founding of Greenwich. And this is a request for approval of the installation of this 375th anniversary memorial plaque to be mounted on the bluff at Greenwich Point on Elizabeth's Neck. On July 18, 2015, Greenwich will celebrate the 375th anniversary of the founding of Greenwich. On July 18, 1640, Robert Feek and Captain Daniel Patrick purchased land between the Assamuck, that's the stream bisecting Binney Park, and the Patamuck, that's the stream which marks the border between Greenwich and Stanford rivers. And Elizabeth Feek, the wife of Robert Feek, purchased Ye Neck, by ye Indians called Manakawag, by us Elizabeth Neck, as her particular purchase. It's now called Greenwich Point. This land purchase is considered the founding of Greenwich. Your approval is requested to install a plaque which includes the language of the 1640 deed on a boulder on Greenwich Point as a memorial. In keeping with the mission of the Greenwich 375th anniversary, the plaque will serve to honor the town's rich cultural heritage by sharing, preserving, and fostering memories of the past and the present while creating a legacy for tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Again, Davida, thank you and all the participating citizens for providing Greenwich a true gift of a knowledge of our history and the unique circumstances and happenings. We certainly look forward to gathering tomorrow and having today's program televised and perhaps made in digital form for other folks to listen to, perhaps our school communities as well. And also the materials, I think, were exceptionally well done and provide a real opportunity for people to access and understand their neighborhood and its development. So again, on behalf of the town of Greenwich and its citizens, I want to thank you and all of the docents and contributors to this program for really producing a first-class historical recognition of the town's founding in 1640. I give you a round of applause. Selectmen.
I want to give a personal thanks to Davida and to all of the docents. Unfortunately, I discovered too late what was going on, and I only joined you in Coscob, so I missed everything before that time. But these tours were fascinating and filled with facts. As a native of Greenwich, I appreciate what you've done. I'm sorry I missed your tour, Dean, because my Irish background would have enjoyed hearing about the Fourth Ward. I hope that all of this knowledge is not going to be lost. Maybe there's a way to keep the tours going some way or other. I'm not sure how, but thank you again for all you've done.
Did you want to say something? Good. I also wanted to point out, for our minutes, I would request we have the inclusion of the narrative that Davida provided with also all of the speakers' names, of course, included. And at this time, I would just request we, formally acknowledge and adopt approval of the plaque that will be permanently established out there at the Founder's Rock. So is there a motion to accept graciously the plaque?
With pleasure.
Second.
Absolutely.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I see we have someone in the form of Mr. Alexander. What purpose would you like to discuss today?
Hello, I came here to thank David, and I'm so glad I get to thank everyone else too. I was here when at a Selectmen's meeting, which I rarely get to, when the 375th was introduced earlier this year, and I'm very excited for our town. I was motivated by that to try to recruit and get going on what we're calling a town plan about the 375th anniversary as a testament. And what I wanted to share and dedicate to the Historical Society and all these efforts is a pulling together of all of this as it was pulled together at the beginning. We heard some talk about streams and rivers and the various communities that were formed based on the water. And I'd like to also mention Long Island Sound, because I think that was the single unifying factor of why we're all here today. The ease of transportation, and in our research, when we found an amazingly accurate 1889 map, which was of our coast, we've been able to put together a group called the Friends of the Greenwich Coast, and we will be trying to honor all our history by bringing back that the shoreline configuration and making it even perhaps a place for our up-and-coming ancestors. The think I just lost a 14th generation fellow New Englander, but I hope we have another 14 coming. I really appreciate everything these people are doing and your efforts, and I'm proud to show you this. Thank you very much. The only thing I'm asking for help-wise is the Friends of Greenwich Coast have decided to have ducks as our mascots, but we haven't been able to name them yet, so please, especially those with youngsters, give us some input on that. We could be found at the coastgreen375gmail.com, or there's a Facebook page for the Friends of Greenwich Coast. Thank you.
Our heartfelt thanks to all of you for your contributions and efforts on behalf of the town and sharing your knowledge with us. We do look forward to tomorrow's program, as well as festivities at the First Congregational Church of Old Greenwich, who I believe are celebrating their 350th anniversary this year. That will take place on Sunday at 10 a.m. And then, of course, the parade that is scheduled to take place on Sunday, September 27th here in town. So again, deep appreciation and thanks, Davida. Thank you.
Thanks, Davida. Thank you.
Moving toward the next item on our agenda, appointments and nominations. We did receive a letter of resignation from Fred Brooks, who is a regular member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Fred is deciding to retire in advance of the completion of his term due to the fact that his wife recently retired as a school psychologist in the city of Stamford, and they are in the process of doing quite a bit of travel, and therefore would preclude him from giving the time and attention he has to the duties he so admirably performed for 9 years, both as an alternate and as a member of the commission. So the process for filling that, of course, is we look at candidates. There is no prescribed requirement that we take an alternate and make them a full member, although that has been the practice. I think it's important to distinguish between requirements and what has sort of been tradition in practice. So we will certainly endeavor to do that. We also have several openings in positions to act upon for Witherell, which I would hope we can endeavor to do by the close of the RTM call for September, so that we can round out the business of the appointments and nominations. We also have a position for the Housing Authority, which I think we should begin to interview folks. It's very important. It's a position occupied presently by George Yankovich. George had requested to stay a year beyond the conclusion of his term. That year has come up, and I think we should proceed to actively engage interested folks. That one, skill sets are important. I know that I was thinking in the terms of legal expertise, certainly valid. Others have indicated a need for some building and construction expertise, since they're doing so much construction and they don't have either an engineer or an architect. So if both of you and the people you know can begin to think about those, I'd like to get them done certainly by September, middle of September.
Absolutely.
Executive session, we have, I believe, one workers' compensation claim to be presented for settlement, and is it, Michael, 4 or 5 tax appeals? 5 tax appeals. So at this time, we need a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of undertaking consideration of the workers' compensation claim, 1, and 5 pending property tax appeals.
So moved. Second.
Without objection.